I remember the smell of the processing center, bleach and boiled wool, and something underneath both of them that I still cannot name. Something the body makes when it has been wrong for a very long time and is trying to become right again. I stood in a queue with 43 other men and women, all of us in the same gray tracksuits, all of us holding the same thin folder of documents that said we had passed the second assessment, the third, the medical clearance, the psychological panel, all of us trying to look like something other than what we had been. The officer at the desk didn't look up when I reached the window. He slid a release form under the glass, pointed to the signature line and said, "Next of kin contact." I said, "Sister-in-law." He wrote something. He still hadn't looked at me. "She's been informed. She'll collect you at the East Gate." He stapled 2 pages together, dropped them in a tray. "To report to Rehabilitation Officer Cantor, every Tuesday and Thursday, 0900. You fail to report, you go back. Found in a group of more than 4, cured without prior authorization, you go back. You leave the city district without signed travel documents, you go back." He finally looked up, and his eyes were the particular flat gray of a man who has had to say the same words many times and has decided that the words do not require feeling. "You understand all of this." It wasn't a question. "I understand all of this," I said. He buzzed the door open, and I walked through it, and that was that. That was reintegration. The East Gate was a cattle pen with a corrugated roof. Families waited on one side of a chain-link barrier, and the released waited on the other, and some of the families pressed their hands through the chain link, and some of them did not. Some of the released walked out alone and did not stop walking. I stood at the fence and waited, and after a while I saw Abby coming across the car park with Cillian's hand in hers. She was thinner than I remembered. Her hair was shorter. She was wearing a green jacket I didn't recognize, which meant she'd bought it after everything, after Luke, after the whole country turned sideways. She walked like someone who had learned to be careful in car parks, in open spaces, in places with too many exits. Cillian was 7, he didn't know me. He'd been 3 when the outbreak began, and 4 when his father disappeared, and 5 when the quarantine zones finally started to wind down. And now he was 7 and holding his mother's hand and looking at me with the complete unguarded curiosity that children have before they learn to be afraid. "Uncle Senan," Abby said. Not a greeting exactly, more like a statement of fact. She was confirming I was who the paperwork said I was, Abby. I didn't know what else to say. There was no version of that moment that language was built for. She opened the gate and I walked through, and she hugged me with one arm. Briefly, the way you hug someone who has come back from something you cannot quite bring yourself to name. Then she looked at Cillian and said, "This is Uncle Senan. He's going to stay with us for a while." Cillian looked up at me and said, "Do you know how to play football?" I said I did. He said, "Good," and let go of his mother's hand and walked ahead to the car, satisfied. Abby watched him go. When she turned back to me, her face had done something difficult and then put itself away again. "There are some rules," she said. "My rules, not theirs. If you want to stay, tell me. You don't lie to me, see, about anything. If I ask you something, you answer it." I said, "All right." I said it and I meant it, and I was already lying, because there was one thing she would ask me, and one thing I could not yet say, and I knew it standing there in the car park, with the bleach smell still in my nostrils, and the gray-eyed officer's indifference still on my skin. I would break that rule. I was already planning to break it. I said all right, and she nodded, and we went to the car. That is the thing I carry. Not the years in the dark. Not the things I did in the dark. What I carry is the moment at the gate, when I looked her in the eye, and said all right, and meant it, and didn't mean it in the same breath. The house was a terrace on Clontarf, 3 blocks from the seafront. She'd kept it because the paperwork was in her name, and American citizens had a slightly different legal standing when it came to property during the emergency period, which was the kind of small bureaucratic accident that saves lives sometimes. The neighborhood was mostly intact, a few boarded windows. The pub on the corner had been a distribution point during the worst of it, and still had the UN insignia spray-painted on the wall above the door, faded now to a ghost of itself. She'd made up the back bedroom for me. Clean sheets. A window that looked out on a small walled garden where Cillian had left a football in the rain. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night and looked at the water-stained ceiling and tried to remember how to sleep in a room where nothing was required of me. I didn't sleep. I lay still and breathed and waited for morning. Connor found me 2 days later. I'd known he would. We'd been told in the processing center not to maintain relationships formed during infection. We'd been told this 3 times by 2 different counselors, and once by a man in a military uniform who didn't introduce himself. What they meant but didn't say was, the infected operated in groups, the pack instinct. Whatever the maize virus built into the nervous system, it built kinship first. A bone-deep recognition of others carrying the same signal. That recognition didn't fully switch off when the cure hit you. It faded over months, the way a language fades when you stop speaking it. But in the early weeks after release, you could still feel it. A tug, a pull toward other cured. A sense that somewhere in the city, there were people who knew what the dark years had felt like from the inside. Connor had always been the strongest signal. He was waiting at the bus stop outside the rehabilitation center on a Tuesday morning after my meeting with Cantor. He was wearing a better jacket than me, and his shoes were clean, and he looked from a distance like a solicitor who had somewhere to be, which was what he had been before. He'd been 2 years from making partner in a firm in Bagot Street when the maize virus came through his building's ventilation system on a Wednesday afternoon in October. He had told me this during infection. He had said it the way the infected said things. Flat, clinical, filed under relevant data. And he had said it again after, in the processing center. And each time he said it, I could hear what it cost him. Not the infection itself, the interruption. Sinan. He fell into step beside me. Easy, comfortable, like we were old friends meeting by chance. Which, in some sense, we were. In the only sense that mattered in this city now. I'm not supposed to be seen with you, I said. You're not supposed to be seen in a group of more than 4. We're 2. That's a conversation, not a conspiracy. He smiled. He had a good smile. He'd always had a good smile. I'd watched him use it on people in the dark years, the way a key is used on a lock, and I was watching him use it on me now. How is she? Fine. The boy, he's fine. She doesn't know. It was not a question, but I answered it anyway. No. He nodded. He walked in silence for half a block, hands in his pockets, looking at the street. A military transport rolled past, a UN-flagged Land Rover with 2 soldiers in the cab. Connor watched it go. His jaw moved. They're going to euthanize the resistant, he said. It's been decided. 5,000 people who didn't respond to the cure, and the government has decided that the humane thing, the safe thing, is to end them. I've heard the same, and you're all right with that. I didn't say I was all right with it. You're living in a house on Clontarf playing football with a 7-year-old. It's all right with it. He stopped walking. He faced me. His good smile was gone now, and what was underneath it was the thing I had known was underneath it since the processing center, since the dark years, since the moment he first infected me and then stood over me while I changed and watched, with an expression I hadn't understood until I could remember. Until I understood that what I'd seen on his face was not regret. They'll come for us next. You know that. The resistant first, because they're easy. Then they'll start on us. The ones who remember. The ones who are a liability. Connor. I've been talking to people. He started walking again. Other cured. There are more of us than they want to count. We have rights. We have a legal standing. We were victims of a medical event. What we did without agency, without capacity. He said it with a barrister's precision. He'd clearly said it many times already. I'm organizing a meeting. Thursday, come. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 2 days. Which is to say, I lay awake on the second night and listened to the seafront and thought about Abby asleep in the next room and Cillian asleep in the room beside her. And I thought about what 5,000 people felt like and what the end of them would look like and what came after that. And in the morning I went. The meeting was in a community hall in Stoneybatter. 30, maybe 40, cured men and women, sitting in folding chairs in a circle the way support groups sit. Connor stood at the front and spoke, and when he spoke, they leaned forward, and I understood for the first time that he had not simply organized them, he had recognized them. He had taken the pack instinct, the thing the virus built, the thing the cure had blunted, but not erased, and given it language, given it a meeting room, and a stack of chairs and a legal argument. I sat in the back and listened, and did not feel good about any of it, and did not leave. The weeks that followed were the worst kind of ordinary. I worked mornings at the rehabilitation center, sterilizing equipment, logging intake forms, doing the work that the CURD were assigned, because it was work the uninfected didn't want to do in buildings that still smelled of whatever the uninfected were afraid of. I reported to Cantor on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He sat across his desk from me and asked his questions in the same flat tone as the man at the processing window, and I gave him my answers, and twice he said something that was almost human. Once about the weather, once about a match result, and then pulled it back and returned to procedure. Abby was working again, freelancing for an American wire service, covering the reintegration as news. She was careful with me, not cold, careful. She asked questions about my days in the same tone she used for everything, with the same slightly tilted attention, the way a journalist asks questions even when she's not working. I answered them. I answered them honestly, except for the one I couldn't. Cillian was not careful with me at all. Cillian had decided within the first week that I was his. He would bring me things, a drawing, a stone he'd found, a piece of broken electronics he wanted explained. He would appear at my bedroom door in the mornings and say, "Are we playing today?" With the absolute confidence of a boy who has decided that the answer is yes. I played. We kicked the ball in the garden until the mud got everywhere, and Abby appeared at the back door with a look on her face that was made of exasperation and relief in equal parts. Those mornings are what I think about now, when I try to remember the good of it. Cantor came to the house on a Thursday afternoon, which was not scheduled, which meant something had changed. I was at the center that day. He spoke to Abby alone. I found out later what he told her, that the infected had operated not as individuals but as a linked system, a hive, that the maize virus had built a kind of distributed cognition, not telepathy, nothing mystical, but a pattern of shared signaling, pheromonal and behavioral, that allowed packs to coordinate. That this signaling persisted in some cured. That the cure suppressed it but did not destroy it. That two cured who had run together during infection remained to some degree attuned to each other. A threat multiplier, Cantor had apparently said. A liability. He showed her a photograph, Connor and I, in the early months of infection, somewhere in the north of the city, not doing anything in that photograph, just standing. Connor was slightly ahead, slightly turned, and I was slightly behind and slightly oriented toward him, and anyone who knew what they were looking at could see it immediately. Pack structure, leader and follower, predator hierarchy. Abby was sitting at the kitchen table when I came home. The photograph was on the table between us. She'd printed it from whatever file Cantor had shown her on his phone. She didn't say anything at first. She looked at me and waited. "I know him from before," I said. "From the center. We were released together." "That's what you told me." She tapped the photograph. "That's not what that is." I sat down. My hands were flat on the table. I looked at them for a moment. I thought about the rule she had given me at the East Gate. You don't lie to me about anything. Thought about how long I had been to break it, and how clearly I had known, from the beginning, that I would not be able to keep it. "Abby," I said, "tell me about Luke." The silence after that lasted a long time. The house made its sounds. Car outside, the refrigerator, Cillian's feet on the floor above us, crossing from his bedroom to the bathroom and back. I told her. Not all of it. I told her the part she needed. That Connor and I had been running together during the second year of infection, and that Luke had come back to the city. She'd told me later that he'd gone back for something. She never said what, and that we had found him. Connor had infected him first. That I stopped. She was very still. "He didn't last the night," I said. "He was too far in before they got to him. I stopped again. He didn't survive it. I'm sorry. That's not the right word, I know that. I know there's no right word." She stood up. She picked up the photograph. She held it for a moment, looking at it, and then she set it back down and she said, "I need you to leave." I left, stood on the footpath outside with my jacket in my hand, and the autumn air coming off the sea, and somewhere behind Lindsay's light was on in his bedroom window. I stood there for a long time. I thought about where to go. There was nowhere. There was only Connor, and Connor's meeting hall, and the 40 cured in folding chairs, and the pack instinct humming at the edge of my nervous system like a low-frequency sound. I didn't go to Connor. I walked to the seafront and sat on the stone wall with the water below me and the city lights behind me, and I sat there until 2 in the morning when the cold got into my bones properly. Then I found a hostel that took cured, which was marked on the rehabilitation center's map with a small yellow dot. And I paid for a bunk in a room with 5 others and lay there breathing the dark until morning. Connor found me the next afternoon. He did not say "I told you so." That was not his style. He said, "Come and stay at the hall, using the back rooms." He said it with such complete practicality that for a moment I wanted to do it. Pack signal said do it. The part of me that was cold and alone and had nowhere to go said do it. I said, "What are you planning, Connor?" He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "I'm planning to remind them that we exist. The arson. 1 building. Military checkpoint equipment storage. No one inside. You told me the last ones were empty too." A pause. There was a miscommunication. A soldier died. A soldier who was part of a system that is planning to kill 5,000 people was stationed somewhere he wasn't listed as being stationed. He said it cleanly. No heat. The same barrister's precision. I am sorry about that. It was not intended. It does not change the arithmetic. I looked at him. I had known him in the dark years, and I knew him now. And the thing I was looking at was the same thing with a different face on it. The same coordination, the same hierarchy, the same instinct for structure and consequence with the capacity for grief removed. The cure had not given him his grief back. Or maybe it had, and he had simply decided not to use it. "I'm going to go to Cantor," I said. Something moved in his face very briefly, then it was gone. "No, you won't," he said. "I seen him." He stepped closer. He put his hand on my arm and his voice dropped, and I could hear underneath it the old signal, the old frequency, and it was strange and terrible because it still had some pull in it. "They will never let us be. You know that. Abby throwing you out, that's not an exception. That's the rule. That is what they will all do, always, every one of them. We are tolerated on a conditional basis that they can revoke the moment we become inconvenient. I am not asking you to hate them. I'm asking you to stop pretending that love is protection." I took his hand off my arm. "I'll be at Cantor's office at 9 tomorrow morning," I said. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "I know where Cillian's school is." It was not a threat exactly. It was information, delivered in a flat voice. But we had known each other in the dark, and I understood what it meant. Went to Cantor's office that evening. Not in the morning. I told him what I knew. I gave him Connor's location, the hall, the back rooms, the meeting time. Cantor listened without expression. He asked 2 questions. He told me to stay out of Stoneybatter that night. I stayed out of Stoneybatter that night. The next morning the news was covering something in the north of the city. Fire, they said, but contained. Counter-terrorism units making arrests. Multiple cured detained for questioning. Cantor called me at midday. Connor had not been at the hall when they came. He had known. He had been informed, or he had sensed it. The pack signal working in reverse. The attuned nervous system registering an absence where there should have been presence, and he had been gone before the units arrived. 3 days later, the Cured Alliance freed the resistant. I do not fully know how they did it. The facility was a converted industrial site north of the city, and there were 200 cured in the action. Far more than I had seen at any meeting, which meant Connor had been building beyond what I could see. They overwhelmed the perimeter in the early hours when the shift changed, and they opened the containment sections, and 5,000 resistant poured into the streets of Dublin. The resistant are not what people imagine. I know what they are because I was close to it once. Not resistant. The cure worked on me, but I was infected long enough to understand the shape of the thing. The maze virus did not make you animal. It made you collective. Stripped the parts of the self that say I and left the parts that say we. The resistant were not mindless. They were single-minded. They had one shared imperative, and everything they did flowed from it with perfect, terrible efficiency. The city came apart in an afternoon. The Irish Army deployed within the first hour. Helicopters over the Liffey. Checkpoints sealed, which meant nothing. Because the resistant don't negotiate checkpoints, they go through. They go under. They find the gaps the way water finds gaps, because 5,000 of them are operating with one navigation system. I was at the rehabilitation center when it began. The duty officer sealed the building. We heard the alert klaxons from the military, post 3 blocks away, and then underneath the klaxons, something older and lower, the sound that the city makes when it has decided to be afraid. I thought about Cillian. I thought of his saw, which was 6 blocks from the house, which was in the middle of the 3-block radius, where the first resistant contacts were being reported on the emergency broadcast. I thought about a 7-year-old boy in a classroom who had decided I was his uncle, and who did not know yet that the world was unreliable. I went through the service exit of the rehabilitation center, which was not locked because it was the wrong kind of lock for a siege situation, and I walked north. The streets were not empty. That is the thing people don't understand, who weren't in it. The streets were not empty, and they were not full of running people. They were in between. There were people moving fast, and there were people standing very still, and there were small groups of resistance moving through the between spaces, like current, through water, going where the current went. And the trick was to be still when the current was near, and then move fast when the gaps opened. I had done this before. From the other side of it, I knew how the current moved. I crossed 3 intersections that way. Twice I stood with my back against a shop front and watched the infected pass within 4 meters of me, and I did not move, and they did not register me, because the signal I was carrying, the residual QRED signal, was close enough to theirs that I read as neutral. Not one of them, not prey, something in between. A soldier at the 4th intersection pointed his rifle at me, and then looked at my eyes, the mark the cure left, slightly visible, a faint discoloration in the sclera that was how they'd tracked us since the beginning. And he lowered the weapon. "Get back," he said. "Off the street." "My nephew is in the school on Rathdown Road," I said. He looked at me. He was maybe 23, and he was as scared in the specific way that young men who have been trained for one kind of danger are scared when they encounter a different kind. The school was evacuating 20 minutes ago, sheltering in the community center on Dorset Street. I went to Dorset Street. The community center had 2 teachers and 41 children, and 1 teaching assistant, and 1 very large man with a first aid kit who turned out to be a parent who'd been in the building doing something with the boiler. They had barricaded the main door and were using the fire door in the back as the entrance. Teaching assistant opened it when I knocked and immediately said, "You can't come in." "My nephew is Cillian Reynolds. I'm his Uncle Senan. I'm cured. I've been through IDV processing." I held up my documents. I had learned, in the months of reintegration, to keep my documents in my jacket pocket always. She looked at the documents. She looked at my eyes. She stepped back and let me in. Cillian was in the middle of the main room with a group of 6 other children, sitting on the floor playing a card game. When he saw me, he stood up and crossed the room in 3 steps and put his arms around my waist and stayed there. "I knew you'd come," he said. His voice was muffled by my jacket. I put my hand on the back of his head. I said, "Yeah, Mammy, I'm going to get her." He tightened his grip briefly, and then let go and stepped back and looked up at me with the clear-eyed practicality of a child who has already lived through more than children should. "'Kay," he said. "I'll stay here." I told the teaching assistant I would be back. She started to say something and then stopped and made a decision and said, "Be careful." The route to the house was 4 blocks. The situation on the streets had changed in the 30 minutes since I'd come through. The army had established a hard perimeter on the south side of Dorset, and the resistant were being pushed north by pressure, which meant they were moving through exactly the streets I needed to cross. I know the paths the current makes. I know where it pools and where it accelerates. I went through a lane behind a row of garages and over a garden wall, and through the gap where a fence panel had been knocked out. Months ago, nothing to do with this, and I came out 2 blocks from the house. Connor was on the footpath in front of the house. He was alone. He was standing with his hands in his pockets and looking at the door with the same flat expression he'd used on everything for as long as I'd known him. He had a bruise forming on the left side of his jaw, which I'd find out later was from the soldier who'd shot at him outside the facility. He looked at me and did not seem surprised. "She's inside," he said. She locked herself in when it started. Why are you here? He looked at me for a long moment. Cured signal was very strong now. The city full of resistant had woken it up in both of us. I could feel it. The old frequency humming in the architecture of the nervous system. I wanted to see how it ended, he said. I went past him. I knocked on the door and called Abby's name, and after a moment she opened it, and she was already reaching for her keys, already moving, because she was a journalist, and she had learned how to move toward things. She said, Cillian, he's at the community center on Dorset. He's fine. I need to take you there. She looked at me. Then she looked over my shoulder at Connor, who hadn't moved from the footpath. Abby. I kept my voice level. We need to go right now, she came. We were on the footpath, 10 steps toward the lane, when I heard it behind us. Not Connor, but the other sound. The sound the resistant make when they are moving fast towards something, a low rhythmic breath, that is not quite anything you'd recognize as a sound from the front, but that sits at the base of the skull when you're behind it. Turned. 3 resistant had come around the far end of the street, fast and low. Abby grabbed my arm. I said, go. Lane, I'll be right behind you. She went. The resistant came. I will not describe what happened in the next 90 seconds, because there is no clean way to describe it that is also honest, and I will not make it dishonest for the sake of narrative neatness. I will say I knew how they moved. I had moved that way. And the residual signal worked both ways. They hesitated for half a second when they came within arm's reach of me, registering the ambiguous chemistry, the neither prey nor pack signal, and half a second is long enough if you know what to do with it. I used the half second 3 times. The third time cost me a gash across the forearm from a set of nails that had been allowed to grow long during the years of infection, which is a strange and specific kind of wound that I told the medic later was from a fence. And the medic looked at the shape of it and said nothing, and put 6 stitches in it, came into the lane. Abby was there with her back against the garage wall, and she was not alone. She was holding Cillian, who was covered in dust and had a bleeding scrape on his palm. And beside her was the teaching assistant from the community center, who had brought 2 children with her. And she looked at me with an expression that was beyond fear into something quieter. He got out, she said, meaning Cillian. He went to find his mom. I came after him. Cillian looked at me with blood on his palm and said, I heard the sounds. Later I would be angry about it. At that moment I simply moved them. Back through the lane, back over the garden wall. I lifted each of them over, in turn, the children first, then the teaching assistant, then Abby, then Cillian. And we went through the route I knew toward the community center. We were 200 meters from the door, when the last resistant came around the corner of Dorset Street. It was alone. That was unusual. The resistant rarely separated, and I would learn later that the Army's cordal had fractured this one from a larger group, disorienting it, cutting it off from the hive signal. An isolated resistant is not calmer. It is more random, harder to read. It hit Cillian before I could reach it. It was moving at the nearest warm body, and Cillian was at the end of the line. And I was covering the back and I was 2 steps too far. The attack was not sustained. I pulled it off in less than 3 seconds, but it had bitten him on the left forearm, through the sleeve. Not deep, but the maze virus does not need deep. The teaching assistant got everyone inside. I stood in the lane with Cillian in my arms, his sleeve pushed back, the bite site already reddening, and I looked at it, and thought very clearly and calmly about what it meant. Abby was in the doorway. I looked at her. She had been a journalist during all of it, which meant she had read the literature, the clinical assessments, the reintegration protocols. She knew what a bite meant. Her face did the difficult thing it had done at the East Gate, and then came back to itself. She said, Sinan, I know. Dr. Lyons. She said it the way people say things when they have thought of the only remaining option. If she can get a second dose into him fast enough. Where is she? She was at the facility. 4. She looked at Cillian. He was very quiet. The shock was in him. The facility will be locked down. I stood up with Cillian still in my arms. He had gone heavy the way children go heavy when they are past fear and moving into a dazed compliance. He was looking at the bite on his arm, with the same focused attention he gave to broken electronics he wanted explained. Stay here, I said. Lock the door. Keep the children inside, Sinan. Her voice had something in it I hadn't heard since the car park at the east gate. Softness, exactly. Something more complicated. The facility is north. It's in the middle of. I know where it is. You don't have to. He's mine, I said. He's been mine since the moment he asked me about football. Lock the door. I went north. The streets north of Dorset were the worst of it. The army had concentrated its forces on the main roads, and the resistant had distributed themselves through the side streets and residential lanes the way they always did. The hive intelligence finding the pressure gradient and flowing away from it. I moved through the spaces between them the way I had moved through the processing center queue, with the appearance of someone who had a right to be there, had always had a right to be there, who was neither threat nor prey. The facility was a gray building behind a gray fence, with UN markings still on the walls from the first lockdown. The front gate had been forced. The main doors were open. 2 soldiers were posted at the inner door, both of them alert in the specific way that means they have already used their weapons that day and are prepared to use them again. I held up my documents. One of them read them. He looked at my eyes. He said, "Civilians don't. I need Dr. Lyons. I have a bitten child in a shelter 3 blocks south. He's 7 years old. If she can get a second dose vaccine into him within the next hour, there may be a chance it interrupts the progression." The soldiers looked at each other. "Cured," I said. "I know this building. I know the layout. I am telling you that Dr. Lyons is here, and I need to speak to her. Let me in or come with me." One of them came with me. Dr. Lyons was in the second-floor lab, alone, surrounded by the quiet wreckage of an interrupted experiment. Slides on the bench, samples in their racks. A notepad with calculations that had been abandoned midline. She was a small woman in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair, and the focused, distracted air of someone whose mind is always partly somewhere else. She had been working on a secondary vaccine since the first week of the reintegration. Working on it for the resistant, for the uncured 25%, because that was what she did, and she had not stopped doing it even when the government had decided the resistant were not worth doing it for. I told her about Cillian. I told her the timeline. She listened without interrupting, already moving toward the refrigerated storage units before I'd finished. "Second dose interruption is theoretical," she said. "I've had results in the animal model, but nothing human. You understand that? He's 7. I understand he's 7. She unlocked a unit, withdrew a case. If it doesn't work, it doesn't accelerate the progression. It won't make it worse. That's what I can promise you." "That's enough." The soldier escorted us both back. The streets were quieter now. The army had pushed the cordon further in. The resistant pockets were smaller and more isolated. The sound of helicopters was constant overhead. We went through the gaps and came out on Dorset Street, and I knocked on the fire door, and the teaching assistant opened it and stepped back without a word. Billy was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and a dressing on his arm that Abby had made from her jacket's lining. He looked up when I came in. He looked at Dr. Lyons. "Will that help?" he said, looking at her case. "It might," she said. "Okay," he said. She administered the vaccine. She monitored him for 40 minutes while the sounds of the city settling continued outside. The fever that follows early infection did not develop. His temperature stayed even. At 90 minutes, Dr. Lyons sat back on her heels and looked at Abby and said, "I don't want to say anything yet. It's too early, but his presentation is atypical for this stage." Abby put her hand over her mouth. Dr. Lyons looked at me. "You brought him to me in time, that's what mattered." I nodded. I didn't say anything. Clarence Kurt's operation took another 18 hours. We stayed in the community center through the night. Cillian slept. I sat against the wall opposite him and watched him breathe the way I had watched ceilings when I couldn't sleep, which was the only useful thing I had learned to do in the months since the processing center. Connor was found the following morning. He'd been caught in the Army's sweep, injured, and taken into custody. I heard about it from one of the soldiers who came to clear the community center on the second day. I didn't feel anything particular about it. That surprised me, a little. I'd expected to feel something. The old signal was very faint now. The resistant had all been recaptured or contained. The hive was broken up, and without the hive the residual frequency lost its source, like a radio station going off the air. What I felt instead was very simple: tired. The weeks after were administrative mostly. Dr. Lyons' secondary vaccine worked on Cillian. Perfectly. Not cleanly. There were 2 weeks of fever, a period of quarantine, a follow-up protocol that required monitoring, but it worked. She published her findings within a month. The second dose interruption therapy became the centerpiece of a new treatment protocol that eventually reached the remaining resistant in containment. Kent Tor came to see me in the center's temporary holding area 3 days after the uprising was contained. He sat across the table from me and looked at me and said, "You went out." I did. Against lockdown orders. I did. He was quiet for a moment. "The boy is going to be all right. Not a question. That's what Dr. Lyons says." Another pause. "You're cured," he said. "I've been saying that means something dangerous since the moment you walked into my office." He put his hands flat on the table, looked at them. "I've been saying it the way people say things because they need to say something." I said, "I know. What you did in the streets." He didn't finish the sentence. "A soldier's report put you at 3 contact incidents." 3, he looked at me. They hesitated. Yes, because of the signal. Yes, he was very quiet for a moment. "We have used that differently." "Yes," I said. "I could have." He stood up. He gathered his papers. He said, "Your release conditions stand." Report on Tuesday he left. I don't know what to make of Cantor. I don't think he knows what to make of himself. We are both, in our different ways, men who have been operating on a set of assumptions that the world keeps adjusting. He assumes the cured are dangerous until proven otherwise. The problem is that we are. Problem is that being dangerous and being trustworthy are not opposites, which is a truth that takes a long time to accept when your job is to manage risk. Abby came to see me in the holding area on the 4th day. She brought Cillian. He was wearing a long sleeve over the dressing on his arm, and he sat beside me on the bench and showed me a drawing he'd made. "A bird," he said, though it looked like most things 7-year-olds draw, which is to say it looked like intention more than execution. "It's for you," he said, "because you came." I took the drawing and looked at it for a long time. Abby was standing near the door. She was watching me in the way she had watched me since the car park. Since the very first moment. With the tilted journalist attention, the habit of looking for what was underneath the surface of things. After a while she said, "He can't stop talking about it." I told him I would. "You didn't know it would be that." "No." She came and sat on the other side of me. The 3 of us sat on the bench in the holding room with the fluorescent light overhead and the sound of the center's air filtration system running. And after a while she said, "Luke would have done the same thing. Gone out in it, I mean." I didn't say anything. "He went back into the city for you," she said. "When the outbreak was in its 2nd year, he heard you were, that you'd been infected. And he went back in." She paused. "He was stubborn like that." I held the drawing very carefully. "I know what happened," she said. "I know all of it now, I think. And I know that you weren't, that it wasn't." She stopped. Started again. "Cantor explained the hive mechanism to me properly. What control you had, what you didn't, Abby. I'm not saying it's nothing. I'm not saying that. I'm saying I've been thinking about what you chose when you had a choice." She looked at Cillian, who had found a rubber band on the floor and was doing something engineering-minded with it. "When you went out in the streets and came back for him, that was a choice. It wasn't a hard one. The hard ones never feel hard when you're making them," she said. "That's how you know they're the ones that count." We sat there for a while longer. Cillian showed me what he'd done with the rubber band. It didn't work, which he accepted with great equanimity. Because he had already started thinking about why it didn't work, which was more interesting to him than whether it did. The news broadcast said that 8,000 new infected were now in captivity. It said order had been restored. It said, in the particular language of official statements, that the situation remained under active management. The situation remained under active management. I had a room in a cured halfway house on the north side, which was 2 steps down from the room in Abby's house, and roughly equivalent in terms of what it offered. A place to be still and wait for morning. I had my rehabilitation meetings. I had my work at the center. I had Dr. Lyons' secondary vaccine protocol moving through the system, which was something, which was more than most things. I had a drawing of a bird. Cillian starts school again next week. I am taking him. Abby asked me if I would. It is 3 blocks from the house, and the route passes a newsagent, where they sell a particular kind of fruit pastilles that he has decided are the best this available to the human palate. We will stop and buy them. We will walk to the school. He will go in, and I will go to the rehabilitation center and report to Cantor at 9, which is the shape of the day now, the shape of the weeks, the form that ordinary life has agreed to take. I remember what I was in the dark years. I remember it the way you remember a language you no longer speak, not fluently, but with the precise cold knowledge that you once could. I remember the shape of the hive, the pack hierarchy, the signal frequency. I remember what it cost other people to survive me. And I remember a boy at a gate asking if I knew how to play football. You carry both. That is the truth they don't tell you in the processing center. And it would not help if they did, because no pamphlet ever written has successfully explained what it means to be a person after you have been something else. You carry what you were and what you chose, and you put one foot forward, and then the other. And when the street comes apart again, and it will, because streets come apart, that is what streets do. You go out into it. You go out into it and you carry the boy home. That's all there is. I have thought about it for the better part of a year, and that is all I have found. That you go, and you carry, and you come back, and you hope that the drawing on your wall is enough to prove it meant something. For now, it is. I have been thinking in these weeks about what Cantor said when he came to the holding area. About the signal. About the hesitation. He meant it as a tactical observation. He is a man who thinks in tactical observations. What he was really saying was, you are something we do not have a category for. Not the infected, not the uninfected. Something the virus built, and the cure altered, and the years shaped into a thing that doesn't fit any of the boxes on the paperwork. I know what I am. I have had time to know it. I am a man who remembers eating his brother. I am a man who walked into a city coming apart to find a boy who believed in him. I am a man who understood the hive mind well enough to use it and who chose, every time the choice was available, not to. That is not redemption. Redemption is a word that implies the debt can be settled, and I do not believe that, and I think anyone who has lived in the proximity of the maize virus would agree. The debt does not settle. You carry it, but you carry it in the direction of the living, not the dead. There was a night, 6 days after the uprising, when I was sitting in the halfway house common room at 3 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. The old habit, the ceiling watching, relocated to a different ceiling, and one of the other cured came and sat across from me. A woman in her 40s, named Brigitte, who had been a nurse before infection and was slowly working toward returning to that work. We sat without talking for a while, and then she said, I saw on the news the boy. He's going to be fine, I said. I know. She was looking at her hands. I keep thinking, not about what we did, that's there, it's always there, but about what comes after that. If after means anything, I didn't say anything for a moment. It does, I said. I think it does. I think that's the only thing it's possible to think and keep moving. She nodded slowly. She looked out the window at the dark street, the ordinary dark street that was not coming apart tonight. That was simply a street at 3 in the morning, with the lampposts doing their work, and a cat crossing somewhere at the far end. Patient, she said, the one eye. She stopped. She had a daughter. The daughter is in a school in Rathmines. I found out where she goes to school. A pause. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. I don't know if there's anything to do with it. Maybe nothing, I said. Maybe just knowing. Maybe that's what after looks like. She thought about that. Maybe, she said. She sat there until the sky started to change at the edges. And then she went back to bed, and I made tea and drank it at the kitchen table with the drawing of the bird propped against the sugar bowl, because I'd started carrying it with me, which was not something I had planned to do, and which I could not explain to anyone's satisfaction, including my own. The bird was not a good drawing. Portions were wrong, and one of the wings was clearly larger than the other. And the legs were 2 vertical lines, with no particular relationship to the body they were supposed to support. But the intention was there. Cillian had looked at a blank piece of paper and decided there should be a bird on it, and so there was, in the way that children put things into the world. Completely, without apology, with full confidence that the thing they have made has exactly the value they assign to it. I have decided to agree with him. The city is in a specific kind of quiet now that I recognize from the first months of the reintegration. The quiet of people who have been through something and are deciding how much of it to put down and how much to carry. It is not peace. I am not sure it will become peace in any timeline I will see, but it is the quiet before the next attempt at ordinary, which is the most anyone can ask for. The rehabilitation center is expanding. Dr. Lyons's secondary protocol is processing the first resistant patients, and the results are early but consistent. A higher rate of successful reintegration, a lower rate of residual PAC signaling, something approaching what the first round of the cure promised and only partially delivered. I go to my Tuesday and Thursday appointments. I work my morning shift. I take Cillian to school on the days Abby needs me to. I am learning to be a person again. It is slow. It is the slowest work I have ever done. But I think on the balance of evidence that it is work worth doing. There is a park near the house where Cillian likes to kick the ball. The park has a concrete wall on the eastern side, and we use it as a goalpost, and he is working on a specific kick that he has decided he wants to master. A low curling shot that requires the inside of the foot, and a particular rotation of the hips that he has not quite got the mechanics of yet. Practice it. He gets it wrong and tries again. He gets it less wrong and tries again. Last week he got it right. He stood and looked at the ball, sitting in the corner of the wall where it had landed, and then he turned around and looked at me with an expression of complete unguarded triumph. And I said, "There it is," and he said, "There it is," and we stood in the park in the October light with our making small clouds and the city going about its business around us. Ordinary and damaged and still here. Still here, that is something. I have started sleeping better, not well, better. The nightmares come on the bad nights, but there are more nights now between the bad ones. More nights of simply dark and quiet. And the sound of the seafront, 3 blocks over carrying through the window I leave, cracked open because the smell of the salt water is one of the few things that has worked its way into my nervous system as safe. A signal that means, you are in the world. You are in the living world, and the living world is still running. I think about Connor sometimes. He is in a secure facility, will be for years, and I bear no ill will toward what that costs him, which is not the same as saying I feel nothing. We were in the dark together for 4 years. That is not nothing. Pack Mind built kinship in us out of necessity, and the kinship has not entirely dissolved with the Pack Mind, which is perhaps the most honest thing I can say about both of us. That we are connected, and that connection does not require me to follow where he leads. And the distinction between those two things is the whole distance between who I was and who I am trying to become. Trying is the point. That once in the processing center, a counselor who was better than most, a woman who had clearly thought carefully about what she said before she said it. She said, the trying is the point, not the arriving, not the clean record, not the day you wake up and find that what you did in the dark years has faded to something you can look at without flinching. You may never get that day, but you get to keep trying, which is not consolation, it is the thing itself. Believed her then, provisionally. I believe her now with more of myself than I had to offer at the time. The school bell rings at 3:15. I will be at the gate. Cillian will come out with whatever he has made of the day in that direct, unself-conscious way of his. The drawing, the broken thing, the question he has been thinking about since morning. And he will show it to me, and I will look at it carefully, because things made with care deserve to be looked at carefully. And then we will walk to the newsagent, and then we will walk home. That is the whole of it. That is enough. Outside, a lorry rumbles past on the main road. Someone a few houses down is cooking something, and the smell of it comes through the window I left cracked. Onions, browned oil, ordinary hunger. The city holds the 10,000 small negotiations that make up a day, each one of them proof of something, each one of them a choice that was available and was made. I will make mine tomorrow and the day after that. 1 foot forward then the other. That is all there ever was. That is all any of us had. And on the days when it feels like enough, on those days, it is everything. Bid knocked on my door this morning to say she had decided to write a letter to the girl in Rathmines. To send yet, just to write. She showed me the first line, which was simply, I want you to know that I think about your mother. She looked at me when I read it, checking something. I said it was a good first line. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket and went back down the hall, and I thought, yes, that is what after looks like. That is exactly what it looks like. You write the letter, you carry the line, you keep going.